What made Allied soldiers forget the usual rules of war? Twin lightning bolts in their gun sights. 1944. The muddy plains of Europe. Burnt gunpowder filled the damp air. Steel tracks clanked against the earth. A heavy tank emerged through the smoke. Twin lightning runes marked the front armor. Megaphones dropped. Nobody called for a surrender. The United States Army used mostly drafted men. Over 16 million Americans served during the conflict. Most were civilians. Combat was just a dangerous routine, just a job. For the Waffen-SS, war was a religious cult. Prisoners were rare. They expected no mercy from enemies. This was no standard military unit. Their origins lay far from prestigious academies. The roots traced back decades. 1925, a tiny internal bodyguard detail. Just a few hundred men protected the party leadership, but the organization mutated. The Waffen-SS swallowed the state. They took up weapons to execute a planned genocide that spanned across the entire European continent. 38 divisions by the end of the war. From a small group of guards, Heinrich Himmler built a militarized structure of 900,000 men. He needed a loyal tool. The setup ran on a deliberate rotation cycle. Soldiers did not just hold the front lines against enemy tanks, they managed the internal prison network. Men shifted from muddy trenches to barbed wire watchtowers. A frontline shock trooper today. A concentration camp executioner tomorrow. This calculated exchange of personnel erased the line between combatant and guard. They learned to eliminate unarmed targets behind concrete walls, then brought that exact mindset straight into combat against the Allies. The regular military units fought a standard conventional war governed by international treaties. The SS ignored those rules. The size of this shadow force grew fast. Back in 1939, the core group consisted of just 4 divisions. Himmler drafted men from every occupied territory across Europe. The command structure took in everything. By the collapse of the Third Reich, the organization had grown to 38 divisions, 900,000 men by the end of the war. To put that scale into perspective, that number exceeded the entire living population of San Francisco in the 1940s. It became a private army, operating parallel to the state and loyal only to its political leadership. The total number of frontline combat troops belonging directly to the Waffen-SS exceeded 500,000. Where did the best tanks of the Third Reich go? Into the elite battalions of the SS. Regular Wehrmacht infantry waited in trenches for basic supplies, while Berlin shipped the newest armor directly to favored units. To arm these fanatics, the High Command stripped the most critical resources away from standard military formations. Trains arrived at railheads to unload the King Tiger heavy tanks. SS crews immediately took control of the 70-ton machines, shielded by 185 millimeters of frontal armor and an 88 millimeter cannon. Regular Army officers just watched the handovers happen. This equipment monopoly extended to infantry squads in divisions like Leibstandarte and Das Reich. They received massive shipments of the MG-42 machine gun to dominate the battlefield through sheer volume of fire. Pulling the trigger produced a deafening roar where individual shots blurred into one continuous sound. The extreme speed came with a severe mechanical cost during sustained combat. Firing at maximum capacity overheated the barrel in seconds, forcing gunners to constantly swap the smoking steel tubes. Top-tier hardware required the psychological programming engineered at academies like Bad Tolz. Weapons training took a back seat to the systematic dismantling of a soldier's personal morality. Instructors erased previous attachments to family, religion, or the traditional German state. They replaced those values with a blind oath to the political leadership, creating men who executed orders without hesitation. The regime handed advanced weapons to soldiers conditioned to kill without asking questions. Their primary gun fired at a cyclic rate of 1,200 rounds per minute. An American infantryman lowered his rifle. He refused the surrender. A firing rate of 1,200 rounds offered no protection. It meant nothing. The training camps forged killers. Recruits absorbed the dogma daily. Loyalty became their only religion. Death was a privilege. Blood sealed it. They blurred the line entirely. They were elite warriors. They were killers. They fought fiercely for the oath, but the front lines collapsed. By late April 1945, defeat loomed. SS soldiers waited in the trenches. Mud caked their clean uniforms. They raised their hands. They hoped. Regular army troops often survived. They surrendered. SS men died. American troops showed no mercy. Soviet forces gave no quarter. They executed them right there. Why the instant death sentence? The truth lay behind barbed wire. By mid-April 1945, Allied soldiers found Buchenwald. They found the concentration camps. They saw the open mass graves. They uncovered the scale of the murder. The atrocities sealed their fate. The camp horrors dictated the rules. No mercy existed. The polished collar tabs meant death. Allied troops simply pulled the trigger without a single trial, leaving the bodies to sink deep into the spring mud. How do you identify a fanatic in a massive crowd of refugees? By a hidden mark on the skin. American and Soviet patrols searched captured bodies for one specific detail to deliver a swift verdict without a trial. In the final weeks of the Third Reich, the Waffen-SS numbered nearly 900,000 men. When the front lines collapsed, thousands of them tried to vanish. They stripped off their elite tunics. They threw away the black collar tabs with the silver double lightning bolt runes. To survive, they needed to look like ordinary conscripts. The identification process became a standard drill. An Allied patrol stops a suspicious straggler on the road. They force him to peel off a stolen Wehrmacht greatcoat. The rough gray wool drops to the dirt. Then comes the final test. The prisoner is ordered to raise his left arm high. Regular military forces used removable identification. The U.S. Army issued standard metal dog tags. The Red Army carried small Bakelite capsules with paper inserts inside. A fleeing soldier could just toss these into a ditch and lie about his identity. The SS did it differently. A blood group tattoo sat tucked away directly beneath the left armpit. It was originally designed for frontline medics to perform quick transfusions. Now, it was a trap. The ink could not be scrubbed off. It could not be tossed into the mud. A small black letter beneath the arm permanently locked a man to the Waffen-SS. Why did soldiers of the 1st SS Panzer Division stop a convoy near Malmedy in December 1944? They stopped the trucks to machine gun 84 surrendered Americans. That elite reputation turned a snow-covered crossroads in Belgium into a slaughterhouse. The 1st SS Panzer pushed hard through the dense forest during the Ardennes offensive. American troops threw down their weapons and lined up in the freezing cold, expecting standard prisoner treatment. The 1929 Geneva Convention protected disarmed captives, but these armored units bypassed international law. SS commanders ignored the surrender protocols and ordered heavy machine guns to open fire into the shivering ranks. Men fell backward into the deep roadside drifts. Bright red blood quickly pooled across the white snow. In just a few hours, news of this specific execution would travel down the front line. It forced Canadian and British troops to permanently stop taking prisoners with lightning bolts on their collars. The SS crossed an invisible line, proving they would never follow the basic rules of war. Allied trenches processed the reality of the Malmedy incident very quickly. If the enemy refused to respect a white flag, standard military courtesy dissolved into immediate revenge. American and British infantrymen soon located the men wearing those distinct uniforms. They pushed them against the nearest stone wall and shot the SS captives on the spot without a trial. 2 million murdered civilians. That is the grim, calculated math of the Eastern Front. While gunning down 84 American captives shocked the Western Allies, the East operated on a completely different scale. Here, extermination was a massive administrative project driven by pure ideology. It was never about isolated incidents of sudden battlefield rage. The mechanics of this mass death started rolling in June 1941. Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, accompanied by the notorious Commissar Order. This specific directive authorized SS units to immediately execute captured Soviet political officers right on the spot. They simply lined them up and pulled the trigger. No trials at all, no mercy whatsoever. But the slaughter quickly expanded far beyond captured combatants and political targets. The mobile death squads, known as Einsatzgruppen, moved in right behind the advancing front line. They viewed the local populations merely as targets for rapid, systematic erasure. Look at the sheer numbers. At the Babi Yar ravine in September 1941, they wiped out 33,000 Jews in just 48 hours. They treated mass murder exactly like a strict industrial quota system. Officers tracked the daily kill counts on neat, typewritten ledger sheets. 2 million murdered civilians is an incredibly hard number to fully process. To put that staggering death toll into perspective, it roughly equals the entire population of Paris at that time. These were 2 million unarmed men, women, and children gunned down in ditches. The SS eliminated them with cold, terrifyingly calm efficiency. The final destructive count reached over 600 completely burned villages across Belarus and Russia. How do you find an SS officer inside a crowd of captured Wehrmacht soldiers? You just roll up his left sleeve. Finding the killers behind those 2 million murders came down to one distinct medical detail. Initially, this mark guaranteed priority treatment from frontline doctors, but by 1945, the exact same ink turned into an automatic death sentence. Desperate men gripped their combat daggers to carve the tattooed flesh away. Others pressed glowing cigarette tips directly into their own skin until the pain stopped. The sharp smell of burnt human tissue and black ink filled the cellars of ruined cities. Heinrich Himmler originally ordered this procedure to protect his elite troops. Camp medics tattooed a permanent letter indicating the blood group, A, B, AB, or O, onto the inner side of the left arm above the elbow. The mark measured exactly 7 millimeters. It was a practical decision to save lives during frontline transfusions. Yet, when the war collapsed, those 7 millimeters of ink became an inescapable trap. Fleeing commanders threw their uniforms away and easily forged fake identity papers. But the human body remembered everything. The German military mobilized approximately 18 million men into the regular Wehrmacht forces. None of those regular army conscripts ever received this specific tattoo. That massive difference made the SS veterans completely vulnerable at prisoner sorting stations. If a panicked soldier mutilated his own arm, the raw wound served as a glaring confession. A fresh scar in that highly sensitive location proved guilt just as effectively as the original letter. Allied control officers checked the left arm of every single prisoner. Soviet troops filtered the captives on the shattered streets of May 1945 Berlin. They yanked up left sleeves. They pulled aside men with ink letters. A fresh scar or an intact tattoo meant immediate death upon meeting the Red Army. The Soviet command refused to recognize SS men as prisoners of war. Soldiers classified them as war criminals right on the spot. Retaliation was swift. The Berlin offensive cost the Soviets over 80,000 dead. That heavy toll erased any standard rules of surrender. Frontline units found the blood group marks. They marched the marked men away from the main prisoner columns. Public executions happened exactly where the troops stood. No tribunals, no holding camps, just the dry crack of a single rifle shot echoing in a ruined courtyard after the arm check. A Soviet infantryman spotted the black ink. He raised his weapon. He pulled the trigger. Who executed the SS commanders during the final hours of the battle for Berlin? Their own compatriots from the regular infantry pulled the trigger. Bullets struck the enforcers from directions far closer than the advancing Soviet front lines. An SS officer stood inside a collapsed building, shouting orders to hold the line until the bitter end. The only response he received was the heavy crunch of brick dust under the boots of a retreating Wehrmacht infantryman. The exhausted regular soldier slowly raised his service rifle and aimed it directly at his commander. By May 1945, the military had already buried over 4 million of its own men. That staggering death toll, combined with years of severe physical exhaustion, shattered any loyalty to the ideology. The visual difference between the troops became obvious in the dim light of the destroyed capital. Filthy uniforms of drafted Wehrmacht soldiers stood out sharply against the iron tunics of fanatic SS officers. Regular troops blamed the elite guard for deliberately dragging a hopeless war into their homeland. The illusion of an untouchable masterclass disintegrated alongside the total military collapse. Ordinary soldiers refused to die for men demanding impossible sacrifices. The body of an SS officer remained lying in the concrete ruins, killed by a bullet from a German infantryman. Why did Allied command ignore mass executions? The laws of 1929 stopped working. By May 1945, anger over murdered civilians broke the Geneva Convention. Regimental and battalion officers from the United States, Great Britain, and France received daily field reports. They read the raw body counts from freshly unearthed mass graves. Through the windows of their headquarters, they heard the distant, irregular cracks of spontaneous gunfire. They stayed silent. On paper, strict rules dictated the treatment of captured troops. In reality, commanders offered silent consent to immediate reprisals. The 1929 Geneva Convention clearly outlined prisoner protections. But the scale of SS atrocities made the document useless on the ground. Over 2 million Allied troops pushed into Germany that spring. They found the camps. Restraint vanished. Asking infantrymen to remain calm became impossible. Thousands of SS men lost their lives the second they laid down their weapons. Infantrymen of the 45th U.S. Division freeze. They silently stand before the railway cars. The dark camp gates loom ahead. It is a cold morning in April 1945. Officers look the other way entirely. They knew the dark truth. They knew what their men saw. Dachau broke the tired infantrymen completely and beyond repair. The stench hits them first. It is a sickening smell. Thousands of emaciated bodies rot inside. Pale limbs spill over the edges of the wooden wagons. These Americans fought very hard. They survived 500 bloody days. They saw heavy combat across Europe. They watched friends die on foreign soil for many months. Trust was already dead anyway. The white flag meant absolutely nothing. SS troops ruined that symbol entirely. They faked their surrender very often during fierce street battles. A soldier drops his heavy weapon. He raises his empty hands high. He screams for mercy loudly. He lures the careful enemy out from their secure cover. Then he grabs a hidden grenade. He hurls the explosive fast. The blast tears flesh apart. This cowardice killed too many good men in the field. Trust vanished. It was gone. Sympathy disappeared completely. Allied troops finally learned a very harsh and unforgiving lesson. They formed a very grim reflex. Shoot on sight, show no mercy. Eliminate the deadly risk before it can threaten your life. Now look at this death camp. Look at these horrific railway cars. See the piles of hollow skulls. The sheer horror drives the breaking point over the edge. Nobody waits for official orders today. Nobody reads the old combat rules. The laws of war mean absolutely nothing. The rifles fire. The furious troops line up the guards. They pulled the triggers without hesitation, executing the camp personnel right there in the dirt. The men who considered themselves an untouchable military elite ended the war as a common criminal syndicate. The spontaneous executions outside Dachau were merely a bloody prelude. A total legal collapse followed. Investigators locked away the combat manuals. Instead, they piled up tens of thousands of volumes of criminal proceedings. The mechanics of their downfall were entirely self-inflicted, as extremist ideology consumed their military strategy. They discarded traditional rules of warfare. They replaced battlefield tactics with extermination directives. They operated completely outside the Geneva Conventions. This radical shift destroyed their core identity. They stopped being a national defense force. They became a heavily armed gang. Their sheer scale was staggering. The Waffen-SS expanded to include nearly 900,000 personnel across 38 divisions. They commanded heavy armor and artillery, but this massive size could not protect their legitimate army status. The volume of troops only multiplied the evidence against them. Allied investigators captured their internal memos and execution rosters. The legal reckoning erased their prestige. The courts examined the massacres. The judges read the reports. The world refused to recognize them as lawful soldiers. In 1946, the International Military Tribunal delivered its verdict in Nuremberg. Official documents permanently fixed their status as a criminal organization. 8th of May, 1945. While prosecutors drafted indictments in Nuremberg, hundreds of wanted officers were already buying tickets out of Europe through the Odessa network. The International Court wanted a clean sweep of the entire command structure. Thousands of high-ranking officers received death sentences. But carrying out those sentences required finding the men first. Smugglers used established transit points across Italy and Spain to quietly move fugitives toward Argentina and Brazil. They traded their old uniforms for civilian clothes and assumed entirely new identities provided by underground contacts. Clean passports guaranteed them a quiet old age in South America.